Good afternoon, clay buddies. My name is Chris Burch. Welcome. I want to thank you all for stopping in and for the opportunity. To Stacy and Tim and the admins of the Clay Buddies channel, this has been quite a blessing to my life. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be a member and to have this chance today to demonstrate for you. I really appreciate it. So today I'll be covering making handles. And I'll be also covering making lids for my honey pots and other lidded jars. If there's time, I'll trim and attach a handle to a mug. So we'll just have to see how things go. But if you guys have any questions, let me know on the way. I'm just trying to get signed in here everywhere so I can see what I'm doing. Well, it's not showing me the stream on my iPad here. Just a moment, sorry. There we are. Okay, cool. All right, welcome. So we're gonna look at a handle. So I have some mugs in different parts of the process. So right now I'll just kind of show you. I make strap handles. So I'll say this, between the two people that preceded me, Matt and Martha, I've got some big shoes to fill. So these are nothing glamorous or glorious, but for me, it's about simplicity. I learned how to pull handles in my ceramics class in college. We weren't allowed to extrude them. So for me, that's just kind of what I've stuck with. So here's another greenware piece. And then just a couple finished pieces to show. So this is my daily drinker right here. I really enjoy this clay, and it's this clay in particular, chocolate by New Mexico clay, is a lot like B-Mix. But anyway, just wanted to give you an example of how they're attached and finished. I have one that has a crack. I don't know whether or not you'll be able to see it, but if you look right there, there is a crack. So this was earlier in my pottery days. So anyway, attaching porcelain to a different clay body doesn't always work. So I've found that out. But let's get into pulling handles. So I'll start with a little lump of clay. And I'll wedge it just a little bit here. Hello, Jennifer. Hi, Vicki and Robin. How are you doing today? So for me, it works best if I don't have too large of a lump of clay, because what I'm going to do next after wedging that a little bit is just roll it into kind of a carrot shape. And it has worked better for me to use my non-dominant hand for this. I'm not really sure why, but it does work better. Maybe I just don't put enough pressure down and it doesn't destroy the handle or flatten it too much. So there we go. Just that little carrot shape. Then I'll start with my little bucket of water here. And I'm just gonna rotate this lump of clay in my hand 360 degrees. Till I somewhat have it round. I don't know how easy that is to see, but just roundish, okay? Dip again, my hand again. From here, I'm gonna slip the clay in between these two fingers, my pointer and middle finger of my right hand, and I'm just gonna lightly pull. Then I'm gonna rotate. Well, hello, Tara. Rotate back and forth. And then as I feel any friction, I'll dip it in the water again. And just back and forth. Normally, these drops go all over my studio floor, but today they're going on my wedging surface. So many times I'll end up with a handle that's way too large for what I'm gonna do. So I will just snip it off. And that can go back in my clay bag. And then on the other side of the phone there, I have a plaster slab that I use. And basically, I just lay the handle over and just pinch it off. Okay, then I can take the same lump of clay. Now my left hand's still dry, thankfully, and I will just roll that same carrot out again. Okay. And I'll just start that process over. Just twisting and pulling. Now, if you're new to this, you may end up finding that you get areas of uneven thickness just because of pulling too hard, and you want to go all the way down through the bottom for this particular type of handle. Now we'll flatten it. Hello, Carrie Lynn Collins. So rotating back and forth. Till I get the desired thickness that I want. This may be hard to see, but the way my fingers track along the handle, usually I'll end up with a little high spot here. So I try to alleviate that by rotating that in my fingers. But it doesn't always work, especially if it's too wide there. So during the time of attachment or as I'm preparing that piece of greenware for bisque, I will take care of that, sanding it off a little bit, wearing a respirator, all those things. So anyway, that's a couple handles. We're gonna jump over to the wheel, so I apologize for having to move the camera, but we're gonna jump over to the wheel. While those handles dry a little bit, I'm going to throw a couple lids for my honey pots, and you'll see what those look like. So what I'll show first, so here's a honey pot that I threw last night, and here's the lid. And I'll show you in a minute that underneath the top of the lid is hollow, so like a mini closed form, so to speak. And then so you can see the gallery too of the honey pot. Hello from Boston. Hi, Karen. All right, now for the honey pot, I use a 4-ounce piece of clay. These can be thrown off the hump, but for me, I like to be able to leave each one attached to the bat so that as I'm trying to fit it later, it doesn't fall off. But there's nothing wrong, absolutely, with throwing on off the hump to do these. And if you hear some noise outside, I have a garage studio. There are some kids playing out there, so I'll apologize. They're not my kids, but. So I'm just coning up and pushing back down like I do for every piece I throw. Hey Tim, I wanted to say thanks for your video on preparing for this, because I have my computer in my garage so that I can see the comments without having to just try to stare at my phone. So it makes that way easier, and thanks for all the benefit you bring to the group. All right, so after centering, I'm gonna flatten, and I was remiss not to mention I would recommend before you start throwing your lid that you have a set of calipers and that you measure the inside diameter of where the lid will sit. So that way you can throw your lid to the right diameter. Now, for me, a lot of times I'll throw the lid just a little bit wider, than the pot itself so that I can trim to fit. For me, I want a very, very snug fit. So I'll do that. So in this case, I'll throw it a little bit wider. So I'm just widening it a tiny bit. And then drilling a hole all the way to the bat. Yes, Stacy, Tennessee is pretty awesome. Oh, you're welcome, Carrie. Thank you. All right, so I have that hole all the way to the bat. Now, as I push down, notice that the middle will raise up a little bit. That's exactly what we want. Now, we also want to keep in mind that we don't want to do away with too much thickness right here as we're pushing down, because we're going to need that thickness as we trim the lid later. All right, so we'll slow the wheel a little. So I'm indenting where someone's fingers would be to grasp on that little knob. And then I'm going to close off. Again, just like a little closed form. Okay, so that air that's trapped in there, that'll totally be fine. In my experience in throwing closed forms early on, I had a lot of... Hi, Don. I don't know if I'll chatter this honey pot, but I will do one at some point. But with my early closed form pieces, when I trapped air, I didn't realize I had to poke a little hole in order for that air to be able to escape, because I had some cracked pieces. But for these, they're not on the bat long enough to really have that be an issue. So after I close this off, one thing I'll recommend is compress at the very top, down some, back and forth. This has helped me alleviate cracking on the very inside of the knob. So there we go. All right, now with those calipers and that preset measurement, so I'm almost there already to the inside diameter of the honey pot. So what I'm gonna do then, just a little bit of pressure with my pinky under the edge. So I'm bringing up this lip here. In some ways, part of this is kind of like a little plate doing the rim. And then I'm just gonna pinch there and flatten that a little to bring that diameter back out. And then we'll measure again. Okay, so again, we're almost there. So I can just pinch a little bit more outward and then give myself that flat area. All right, so that's a little bit wider. So I know I can bring it in a tiny, tiny bit. And that way, when I'm ready to trim, I can trim it to fit the gallery there. So just getting some of the slip away. And then I'll just get myself an area for the wire tool later on. All right. So that's what that lid looks like. And that should sit nicely inside the honey pot or sugar dish or whatever it is that you want to make. And I'm going to clean my hands because I want to show you a honey pot that is in the greenware stage, so you can kind of get an idea of the lid on the inside. Then I'll throw another lid without that hollow area. So here's that honey pot, and the lid itself looks like that. Yeah, you should definitely try it for sure, Michelle. It's fun. Now, you might ask why that little hole is there instead of creating that slot. So many times there's a slot there. Again, for me, there's no way that's better, This is just the way that I prefer to do it. It lessens my margin for error. Let me see if I can find my little tool that I use to cut those. Yeah. So this tool, so I can get the right size diameter hole to allow for shrinkage, of course, so that the honey pot, the little stick, the dipper stick, will still fit without being too tight. So all right, do one more lid here. Yeah, thank you, Cecilia. That is a great way to make a lid. I agree. Oh, you use that tool for everything, Nicole? Awesome. All right, so again, 4 ounces. Centering little pieces of clay is hard compared to bigger pieces, but maybe one day I'll venture into making the tiny pottery. My wife loves that stuff. Hi, Joanne. One more cone here. Kim, that tool, I got it at my local pottery supply. If anybody knows the name, please shout out here. Oh, nice, Jody. Keeping bees, I bet is pretty cool. All right. So the second way to make the same lid would be, after you center, is to just push to compress down here, and then the knob is going to pop up for me. And again, being mindful of the thickness, because we want to be able to trim away at the bottom a little bit later. Okay, now the knob can be shaped however you'd like it to be. I'll push that indentation first. And then flatten that clay. Just the thing to keep in mind is allowing room for the end user to be able to grasp it here in order to pick it up. Other than that, go crazy on your design. Sometimes I'll put a little indentation here just to make it look a little more interesting. Maybe in trimming, I'll carve a couple grooves, stuff like that. So once your little knob is there, then just again like a plate with the rim here. Pinching out a little bit. And then I'll have a flat area, maybe a 1/4 inch wide. So from the edge of the lid to about here is about a 1/4 inch. That way I have a place that sits flat inside the gallery of the lidded jar. So we're almost the width we need to be. So we'll get some more clay. Get that little flat space. Then my little area for the wire tool later. And just getting that slip off of there. Yes, Andrea, definitely throw some lids. It's fun. They will definitely dry out before your pot, the rims especially of the lids, so just be careful and mindful how you manage that drying process. Usually I'll put all my pots under one sheet of plastic on the bats, and then I'll put all the lids under another, so I'm not creating areas of extra air. that will allow the lids to dry sooner than the pots, because then trimming is going to be difficult. Okay. So we have about 30 minutes-ish left. So you guys can vote. The first 2 or 3 people, would you like to see me throw a honey pot or trim a mug and attach a handle? Which would you prefer? Hello, Ruth. Yeah, my comments aren't loading right on my computer, so I'm looking at my phone. What do you guys think? Whichever you prefer. Honey pot, trim mug and handle. Okay, the next person that votes, trim the mug and attach the handle it is. All right, so let me grab a little clay. All right, so this handle I pulled a little bit before this live stream so that I could potentially trim and attach. So we'll do that. Alrighty. So here's the mug. So that's how I check my dryness as things are. Okay, if I have time to do both, I will do both, Stacy. Absolutely. So this is how I check my dryness when the pieces are under plastic or when I have them turned upside down, sitting on the bats, so I can know when they're ready. Another thing I use, some people have made their own, but it's a rounder. So I will use this to keep my mug round during the process of drying. And keep in mind how much downward pressure you're pushing, because it will crack your rim of your pot, definitely. So we'll get on to the trimming part here. So tap center or center, however it is that you do center pieces, whether it's Giffen grip, whatever it is. And there are times I will attach the pot to the bat by wetting the rim. If it's a shorter piece, I don't have as much risk of it toppling over. But where it's a mug and a live demonstration, I will attach with my clay lugs before trimming. All right. I trim at full speed. The reason being, it'll push away the clay that comes off, so I don't have to mess with it too much. So I throw my mugs and other pieces, bowls included, with a little extra thickness in the bottom and right here, because I want to make some decorative marks with my trimming tool. So essentially, like similar to the honey pot here, I'll leave a ring, some kind of decoration, which in many cases can catch that runaway glaze. But also it looks nice when it's sitting flat on a surface to have that little extra bit of lift. So I do this in many different ways, but this way I'll show you here. Just determine where your outside of your foot ring is going to be, and I just trim straight down. Okay, now I'll start from the outside, work in, decide where I want my thickness, and then I will just bury down the far right corner of the trimming tool here, the square edge. And usually I'm counting revolutions of the wheel to give me my desired depth. And if you want to know, that number is 40 revolutions typically. This mug is 1.5 pounds. Oh, Donnie, been waiting to see me trim? Well, you got it, buddy, and with audio. So after I've dug down the first little edge there, I'm just gonna walk in with the square edge trimming tool into the center and out to the edge and back. Now I'll switch over to the round side. And I know that potters out there who trim, you've probably experienced where the edge of this round side gouges out your foot ring. So I've just learned to be very mindful when placing it at the edge near the foot ring. And one more pass just to flatten and burnish the bottom. And then here in the corner, I'm going to continue to shape that foot ring. Just make it a little thinner. And it's shaped at an angle. So where it touches the mug, you know, down here at this corner is thicker and at an angle. And then I'm just going to barely touch the tool and round off the edges of the foot ring there. Ooh, sorry about that squeak. All right, so there's the foot ring, and then I'll also check thickness just by tapping. All right, now that little groove that I put in the bottom, just the edge of the trimming tool, I count with that one too. That one's 20. And that just tells me I don't want to go any further, or it's going to be too thin. So I will round that off some. And then I always burnish my pots. I'll start with the trim tool all the way down to the angle. And then I'll come back with a little steeper angle. It is challenging not to leave lines in the side. And then I have a couple sculpture tools, if I can find around, there it is. So these sculpture tools I found on Amazon. Now, Dusty Hansen is motivating me to get into sculpture, but for me right now, they're good for my burnishing. So I'll use the straight side. Notice it will pull a little bit of clay away, but as I go down, it's going to pull less and less. And now my left hand is just following the tool down. So I have my left thumb here, following the tool down till I get to that angle. And then where that angle is, I can switch to this round circular piece of the tool and get that angle there, where I also, when I turn the mug over to finish the rim, I can burnish it that way too. So, but I try to do as much at this stage as I can. Then last little bit of information, my foot ring, I always go back over it very lightly. So much like a rim compression, I'm using the same two fingers I used during that rim compression and using this rubber rib just to finish off the foot ring. Now where this is very, very beneficial is if you use clay that has grog in it, because it'll push the sand back down under the surface. So for me, it's really critical that I don't scratch someone's table after they buy my piece and bring it home. Just a few little crumbs. Okay. So I will now flip the mug over. Oh yeah, Stephanie, it's definitely weird watching a live stream because everything is mirrored, but I'm going to go back and round again in case, for whatever reason, I dinged the rim as I was holding it down with those lumps of clay there. I'll have the surface of my bat not quite as wet as when I was trimming the foot ring, because now that I've finished off the foot ring, I don't want to mar it up. Okay, and then I'll tap center again. Okay. Now, when you're trimming, especially after you flip the piece over, if your piece is too wet, what I've just done will dent in the bottom and the foot ring. So just be mindful of how dry it is. Now I'll finish up that angle, so it's definitely easier to see now. And I've got two of them. And then I will typically take it on the very top of the rim, just lightly, and also over, because I'll invariably always leave sponge marks when I'm cleaning out the slip. So at least where the surface of the person's mouth is going to be when they're drinking from that, I definitely don't want them to feel anything irregular. Of course, glaze will do very well and cover it. Just the perfectionist in me, I guess, is overriding maybe what's necessary. Oh, Jody, tap centering is something you aspire to? Definitely. It is not an easy thing to learn, but it is very, very helpful. Many, many schools of thought on that, but okay. So we have a trimmed mug. Now we'll go over attaching the handle. So I also always wipe away the clay from the foot ring there that may have collected from these lumps. Oh, you did some burnishing, Michelle, with your metal rib and cut yourself? Yeah. I always tell my students when I'm introducing them to the tools that that is one that's super, super sharp. So to be very mindful. Now I'm always going to clean my wheel. Oh yeah, dump out the clay. But I'm always going to clean off the surface of the wheel. I don't want to attach any little crumbs to the mug. Now, this handle. I take my handy dandy needle tool here. I'll cut away a little bit of that clay. So one thing is, I always attach my handles when they're just wetter than leather hard. The reason being, I can still shape it as I need to without it cracking. Now, if I notice, however, that something is starting to look like it might crack, I'll add a little water right at the bend, and which will also help me shape without cracking that handle. Usually I'll pull 8 or 10 handles at a time, then trim my mugs, then attach my handles. So it can get kind of precarious. So first I'll start with a little hook, candy cane type hook. And right here is where the handle is going to be attached to the mug. So here with my mug, lay it on my leg, and I want to figure out where it will sit nicely. With a mug that's this size, I usually size it for my 3 fingers. Okay, I'm going to trim off the bottom here. Now I will cut my area. Well, I guess not cut, but indent my area there for the bottom of the handle, or the top of the handle, and then there. And I will score. Okay, then a paintbrush and a little cup of slip. Just dabbing that slip on. So it's not enough to run, it's not thick enough to run, but it is thick enough that it's going to create a nice little area for me to attach the handle. Then I will score this side of the handle. And And as I'm attaching, I'm pressing lightly and twisting a little bit. Then just flattening some. Get it where you can see. Just flattening that there. So Allison, I found the tools on Amazon. They're sculpture tools. Hobby stores have them as well. But they work very well. There's lots of different angles, so depending on what you're making, there's probably an angle for it to burnish. Now, after the top part is on, I will size the handle there. So I'm mocking it up now before I put the bottom on. And what I'm thinking about is I don't want the person's fingers to be resting there, which can be uncomfortable. Now in the greenware stage, that is lightly sanded just to remove a little bit of that thickness. But I'm processing that. I don't want their finger, their knuckle to drag along there. And I also don't want the handle too far away from the mug. So here, I'm going to make a little indentation that my pinky will sit on. So it's very comfortable in my opinion. Now, obviously I want to allow for shrinkage of the clay, so I don't want it to be tight with my 3 fingers because then I won't be able to fit them in. And the funny part is I end up using 2 fingers with my mugs, but not everybody does, so I want to try to appeal to the masses if I can. So when I have that set to where it needs to be, I'll do the bottom attachment. So this is another reason that the handle should be a little bit wetter than leather hard, just so as I'm moving it around, because you saw I just moved it from here to here, I'm not going to twist it and crack it. I hate having to start over. So scoring again. Now I won't score the underside of this bottom piece of the handle. It is plenty with the slip here. And then a light press and twist. I will agree the handle does look thin, but for me, I want the handle to be the same thickness as the rim. So if the mug was thicker, I would be making a thicker handle for it. But I assure you, it's plenty thick for the purpose of holding the coffee or whatever's in the mug. Okay, so once I have it attached, I want to go ahead and eliminate some of that thickness. So I just use the needle tool. Getting some of that thickness down. Then I'm going to, where it looks a bit messy, I'm going to square that off. And then, let's see if I can find my little, yeah, there it is. Again, I bought this at my hobby or my pottery store. I don't know who makes it. These ends had rubber on them. They quickly started to tear away, so I tore it away from here. It's got a double blade on it. And so this is very helpful for me to get the handle to the size that I want it to be, the shape that I want it to be. And also it helps me smooth in the clay so I can get the handle shape that I want. And then I'll kind of round these edges off a little. Again, being mindful of that user and them not feeling something sharp. Okay, same thing with the bottom. Usually I'll make 8 handles, trim 8 mugs, and then as I'm attaching the handles, literally I will size it, score it, slip it, attach, and then as I'm done with the 8th one, I start back on the first one in smoothing everything away, because by then that slip is fairly dry. So right now it's wet and it's kind of getting in the way, but just for the sake of being able to show you. Oh, ZM tool done? Okay. Yeah, Tommy, I am precise, I think, to a fault at times, but I do love this. So now, last thing, there is slip puddled here and here. So I will take a needle tool, pushing down, it'll smooth that slip and also close off any area that could potentially crack away later. And also I'll roll my tool down and making a little indention, just kind of for decoration. But I want to smooth, I want to smooth all of that. So I don't know if you can see how the slip is kind of spilling out there, which is a reason that I usually wait, but I just want to smooth it all. And then on this side as well. Usually I'm looking at it this way, so it's a bit easier to manage that process there. Okay, so after everything's smooth, which that slip's really giving me a heartache right now, but we'll just call it done. I want to talk real briefly about drying these mugs. So early on, I would put this mug upside down and then have it under plastic and leave it for a day or so. But what I was finding was the mug was still wet versus the handle not being so wet. So what I do now, hi Denise, thank you JC, I appreciate that compliment. What I do now is, let me move my camera. I have metal shelves, that like baker's rack shelves, and I actually have a closet in my house. I took over 2 shelves of my wife's pantry, but the top 2 shelves, overnight, this will sit on a bat under plastic. The next day, so I usually wait, I'm usually impatient, but the next morning sometime, I will open those up to the air and leave them sitting on the metal shelves so that air gets to the bottom, because where we have issues is when the handle dries too fast at the attachment points and the body of the piece is still wet. You'll definitely have cracks. So how I've learned to combat that was, again, under plastic overnight, mug facing up, and then on the wire rack overnight for the next few days, and then it will be totally dry. So there's a mug, there's a handle pulled and attached. All right, so now I will throw a honey pot for you. And I have trimmings all over the place. I usually don't trim on this wheel because the splash pan is not high enough like my other wheels. I have seen methods of people having boxes and other things that are made to catch the trimmings, but anyway, this wheel's quiet, so that's why I'm doing it. So I have 1 pound 4 ounces here for this honey pot. All right, so we're just gonna cone up a couple, 3 times. Oh, you're welcome, Shar, no problem. Thank you, Cecilia. All right, so now that we have coned there, this is ready. All right, so I'll drill this hole here. And again, when I throw my pieces, I do leave a little extra thickness in the bottom, in the foot, and also about the bottom inch, inch and a half of the piece, so I can do the trimming I want to do and the decoration I want to do. So I always will check my thickness with my needle to see where I'm at before I widen. Okay, now we're compressing here. Thank you, Susan, I appreciate that. Yes, 1 pound, 4 ounces. So lots of schools of thought in lifting and things. Me personally, I need or want a sponge in my hand, at least for the first couple pulls, because it's going to take away that layer of clay that always gets stuck in my hand and my fingers. So Sandy, if I make the bottom too thin, now I'll usually catch that when I'm about to widen. So if you haven't widened the piece yet, you can push clay back down to the bottom and then compress over it, which will fix it. Another thing I do is, let's imagine this is the bottom of my pot right here, the breakaway or tear away image here. So if this is the bottom and I've drilled all the way down to the bat, if I lift my fingers, so again, I have not widened the hole yet, so I've just drilled. So if I lift my fingers up and pull straight across, then I've added that thickness to the bottom of my pot. So that's the second way to fix it. Now, let's say you get all the way to the trimming stage and you realize that bottom's too thin. What I will tell you is chuck it and make a new one. However, if for whatever reason you're not able to, if that was something special, you've done some decoration you may not be able to repeat, you could always add a slab to the bottom. So that's the least recommended, I would say, of the methods to fix the bottom if it's too thin. I hope that helps you. And Deb, it is a Mud Tools backwards sponge. Yeah, absolutely. And it's tearing up. I've used it so much, so. But second pull, I'm going to grab there in the bottom. Now, one thing about lidded pieces is you don't really want to mess with thinning the rim like you might as a mug or something else, because you want to make that gallery. So now my pulls will be without the sponge. I'm going to go ahead and collar in a little bit in preparation for making that gallery. Okay. Now I'll collar. And, you know, if desired, you can make some decorative little channels there. I really like that look. This clay is B-Mix by Laguna. It's a Cone 5 clay. Now, for the gallery itself, I'm using a wooden dowel. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Sometimes I use the corner of my wooden rib. It's actually a good way to start. So if you get the tool wet and the rim of the piece is wet, you can start the channel there, the gallery. Some people use their fingernail, so that's a good way too. The key being supporting this rim here so this doesn't collapse, and making sure it's wet enough so there's no friction for sure. This clay has no grog, There is Cone 5 B-Mix with grog, but I don't use that. I've only maybe used it once or twice. But essentially, there's the gallery. Now it'll be trimmed a little bit later in the trimming phase just to get everything clean and matching up. But right now I'm squaring it off. All right, so now we'll clean up. My sponge on a stick fell, which is normally what I would be using here. So Deb, I do use speckled buff. It is a nice clay. It is groggy though. So I definitely don't prefer that for some of my functional things, but at the same time I have made several mugs with speckled buff. It just all depends how you handle it in the trimming stage. All right, so now we're going to cut away a little bit of clay from the foot there. And then we'll get our slip off the bottom. Now here I can further accentuate those areas that I used. I basically used my middle finger inside and these two fingers on the outside and push the clay here. So I can further accentuate those with the end of the metal rib. And just touch up finishing here. And then I'll measure the gallery where it actually happens to be about the same as I already had these set. So there is throwing a honey pot. Do you guys have any questions? It's about, I'd say like 7 minutes. 7 minutes left. You guys have any questions? Thank you, Cami. I appreciate it. Gina, thank you. Carrie, thank you. Thank you, Joanne and Ronnie. Thank you. I appreciate your time today. So yes, I will wire this off. Thank you for that reminder, Janet. And then they will be sat out to dry for a little while. And I will use the rounder as well for especially keeping, I don't mind so much if the rim of my mug warps a bit, but these honey pots and these lids, obviously if it warps, the lid will no longer fit. So that's a challenge. So having a rounder available for you, however you achieve that, whether it be Walmart pot or you make your own or you buy one, it'll all work. I enjoyed it too, you guys. Thank you. I appreciate all of you tuning in today. It means a lot to me. I was super nervous, but as soon as I started going, that all went away, so. Yeah, it does, Tim. Oh. The gallery, so I used two different tools. I started with my wooden rib, this corner. So I held it here. And then I finished with this dowel. This is a dowel that I use to pull up the bats. So this ends up finishing it off. It was great, Judy. Thank you. Stacy, thank you. I appreciate all of you. I'm going to go ahead and hit the finish button here. Corey, thank you. See you. Take care. Thanks a lot, you guys. Have a good day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.